On September 18, 1981, 52 children boarded the yellow school bus number 714 in the small town of Millbrook for what should have been a routine trip to the local science museum. The driver, Howard Faulkner, a well-respected man who had driven that same route for 15 years, radioed in their departure from the school parking lot at precisely 8:17 a.m. 20 minutes later, both the bus and everyone on it had vanished without a trace. No distress call was made. No witnesses reported seeing anything unusual on the rural highway that morning. The bus simply disappeared as if it had driven off the face of the earth, leaving behind nothing but questions and heartbreak. Search parties combed the dense forests surrounding the route for weeks, but as days turned into months and months into years, the case of the missing Millbrook children became the town's darkest mystery, a wound that never healed. The morning had started with unusual fog, thick and oppressive, clinging to the valley like a shroud. Parents later recalled how the mist seemed to swallow their children as they walked toward the waiting bus, small figures disappearing into white nothingness. Some would later describe an eerie silence that morning, no birds singing, no distant traffic sounds, just the soft shuffling of children's feet and the mechanical wheeze of the bus door opening and closing 52 times. Several parents mentioned that their children had complained about strange dreams the night before, dreams of getting lost in a forest where the trees had no leaves, even though it was early autumn. One mother, Ellen Pierce, said her daughter Emily had been reluctant to go to school that day, clutching her teddy bear and whispering that the fog people were waiting. At the time, these details seemed like ordinary childhood fears and coincidences. It was only years later, when investigators began connecting the dots, that these seemingly insignificant observations would take on a chilling new meaning. The town of Millbrook was never the same after that day. Families moved away, unable to bear living in a place filled with so many painful memories. Those who stayed became shells of their former selves, haunted by the not knowing, the terrible limbo of grief without closure. The annual fall festival was canceled indefinitely. The playground at Millbrook Elementary sat empty, the swings moving only when pushed by the wind. Photographers who visited the town in the years that followed captured images of a place frozen in time, yellowed missing posters still taped to lampposts, bedrooms preserved exactly as they had been left that September morning, birthday presents wrapped and waiting for children who never came home. The investigation itself hit dead end after dead end. The FBI's involvement gradually decreased as more pressing cases demanded attention. Millbrook became another cold case, filed away and largely forgotten by everyone except those who had lost someone on bus 714. Isabella Morgan had been 6 years old when her older brother Jacob disappeared with the other children. She had been homesick with strep throat that day, a coincidence that saved her from sharing her brother's fate but condemned her to a lifetime of survivor's guilt. Now 47, Issa had built a life around finding answers, becoming a journalist, specializing in cold cases and unexplained disappearances. Her apartment walls were covered with maps, timelines, and photographs connected by red string, a physical manifestation of her decades-long obsession. She had interviewed everyone still alive who had any connection to the case. Retired police officers, former classmates, the families who remained in Millbrook. For years, she had been working on a book about the case, but could never bring herself to finish it without having answers. The 40th anniversary of the disappearance had come and gone the previous year, marked by a small memorial service attended by aging parents and siblings who had never stopped searching. But Issa knew that time was running out. The witnesses were growing older, memories were fading, and soon there would be no one left who remembered that foggy September morning. It was a call from Dennis Whitaker, the former sheriff of Millbrook County, that changed everything. "Isabella, They found something, he said, his voice shaking in a way that immediately sent chills down her spine. Out in the Black Ridge Forest, about 30 miles from the museum route. Issa gripped the phone so tightly her knuckles turned white, afraid to ask the question that had haunted her for 41 years. "What did they find?" she whispered, her heart pounding so loudly she could barely hear his response. "A bus," Dennis replied, "buried under a landslide area that got washed out in the floods last month. The ID numbers match, it's bus 7. Issa felt the room spin around her as decades of searching crystallized into this moment. Anyone inside? She managed to ask, though part of her didn't want to know the answer. There was a long pause before Dennis responded, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "That's the thing, Isabella. The bus was empty. Not a single body. But there's something else, something I can't explain over the phone. You need to come." Back to Millbrook. Now, Issa threw clothes into a suitcase with trembling hands, booked the first flight to Pennsylvania, and was on the road to Millbrook within hours. The drive from Pittsburgh Airport to her hometown took just under 2 hours. But it felt like crossing into another world. The familiar landscape brought back memories she'd spent years trying to suppress. Jacob teaching her to ride a bike on the driveway, their mother calling them in for dinner, the sound of his laughter. She hadn't been back in nearly 5 years. Not since her mother's funeral. Her father had died much earlier, in 1993. The stress of losing his son having worn his heart out before he reached 60. As she drove past the "Welcome to Millbrook" sign, faded and tilting slightly to one side, she felt that familiar heaviness settle over her. This place had shaped her, haunted her, defined her entire existence. Now, after more than 4 decades, she might finally learn what happened on that foggy September morning. She pulled up to the small sheriff's office where Dennis had agreed to meet her, noticing immediately the cluster of official vehicles parked outside: county police, state police, and unmarked cars that screamed federal involvement. Dennis was waiting for her on the steps, looking much older than when she'd last seen him. His once dark hair was now completely white, his face a roadmap of wrinkles. But his eyes still held that same intensity she remembered from her childhood when he'd promised a room full of desperate parents that he would never stop looking for their children. "Thank you for coming so quickly," he said, embracing her briefly before leading her inside to a conference room where maps and photographs covered a large table. The bus was discovered by a geological survey team assessing damage from the flooding, he explained, pointing to aerial photographs showing a massive landslide area. It was buried under about 15 feet of earth and rock. From the position, it looks like it was deliberately driven off an old logging road and then covered by a triggered landslide. Issa studied the photos, her journalist's mind already cataloging details and forming questions deliberately. "You're saying someone did this intentionally?" Dennis nodded grimly. "That's our working theory. And there's more." He pulled out a sealed evidence bag containing what looked like a small notebook with a faded blue cover. "We found this inside the driver's compartment. It's Howard Faulkner's logbook, but it's not just trip records." Issa accepted the evidence bag with gloved hands, her heart racing as she examined the notebook through the clear plastic. The cover was water damaged, but still legible. Property of H. Faulkner. Bus 714. She had seen Howard's handwriting before. In old police reports and documents her research had uncovered over the years. "What's inside?" she asked, looking up at Dennis, who seemed reluctant to answer. "That's why I called you specifically, Isabella," he said quietly. "It contains entries that go beyond the day of the disappearance, entries dated weeks and even months after the bus vanished." Issa felt a chill run through her body. "That's impossible," she whispered, "unless he survived somewhere, ... Dennis shook his head. "It gets stranger. The final entry is dated exactly 1 year after the disappearance. September 18, 1982, and it mentions your brother specifically. Issa's hands began to shake so badly she had to set the evidence bag down on the table. What does it say about Jacob? She demanded, her voice rising. What happened to my brother? Dennis hesitated, then reached for the bag. I think you should read it yourself. But first, there's something else you need to see, something at the recovery site. The drive to Blackridge Forest took 40 minutes, mostly on winding back roads that cut through dense woodland. Issa sat silently in the passenger seat of Dennis's SUV, the sealed notebook in her lap like a time bomb she was afraid to defuse. The recovery site was buzzing with activity, forensic teams in white coveralls, heavy equipment for excavation, and a perimeter of yellow police tape keeping a small crowd of onlookers and reporters at bay. Dennis used his credentials to get them through the checkpoint, leading Issa toward a large tent that had been erected over what she presumed was the bus. We've kept this part quiet, Dennis explained in a low voice as they approached. No media, no announcements. What I'm about to show you hasn't been processed in any official reports yet. Issa nodded, steeling herself for whatever lay ahead. But nothing could have prepared her for what she saw when Dennis pulled back the tent flap. The bus, now partially excavated from the mud and debris, was intact but transformed by decades underground. The once yellow paint was mostly gone, replaced by rust and corrosion. But it wasn't the deteriorated condition that made Issa gasp. It was what covered every inch of the bus's exterior. Words, symbols, and drawings had been etched into the metal surface, creating an intricate, manic tapestry that wrapped around the entire vehicle. We haven't been able to decipher most of it, Dennis admitted as Issa circled the bus in stunned silence. Some appears to be mathematical formulas, some looks like poetry or prose, and there are drawings that ... He trailed off, gesturing to a particular section where childlike figures had been scratched into the metal. The figures seemed to be holding hands in a circle, but their proportions were wrong, limbs too long, heads too small. There are 52 human figures etched on various parts of the bus, Dennis continued. We counted the exact number of missing children. Issa reached out, her fingers hovering just above the surface of the bus without touching it. And these were done from the inside? She asked, her voice barely audible. Dennis nodded. From the inside. Whatever happened, Isabella, the children were alive in this bus for some time after they disappeared. Issa felt her knees weaken, and Dennis quickly moved to support her. 41 years of questions, of imagining the worst, and now this. Evidence that her brother and the others had survived, at least for a while. I need to see inside, she whispered. Dennis hesitated, then nodded. That's why I brought you here. But I have to warn you, what's inside is even more difficult to explain. The interior of the bus had been preserved in an eerie time capsule of mud and darkness. Forensic lights illuminated the space as Issa climbed carefully up the steps. Following Dennis, the seats were still there, torn and rotted with age, but recognizable. Personal items were scattered throughout, backpacks, lunchboxes, a single shoe. But what dominated the interior, covering every surface, including the ceiling and floor, were more of the strange etchings. Here, they were more elaborate, more detailed. Names had been carved into the backs of seats. Issa recognized many of them, including her brother's, etched above what must have been his seat. Jacob Morgan in a child's uneven handwriting. She touched it gently, feeling the indentation under her fingertips. Physical proof that her brother had been here, alive. Able to leave this mark. The forensic team is documenting everything, Dennis explained softly. But there's something specific I wanted you to see. He led her toward the back of the bus, where the last row of seats would have been. Instead of seats, however, there was what appeared to be an altar of some kind, a flat surface covered with arranged objects, stones in a circular pattern. small handmade dolls crafted from seat fabric and thread, and drawings done in what looked like rust-colored paint. "Is that blood?" Isa asked, pointing to the drawings, but afraid to hear the answer. Dennis shook his head. "We tested it. It's a mixture of rust, soil, and some organic compounds we haven't fully identified yet, but not human blood." That was small comfort as Isa examined the strange tableau. In the center of the arrangement was a crudely drawn map that made her breath catch in her throat. It showed Millbrook and the surrounding area, but with additions that didn't exist. A structure deep in the forest was marked with a symbol that appeared repeatedly throughout the bus etchings, a circle with 5 lines radiating outward, like a simplified sun. "We think this might indicate a location," Dennis said, pointing to the symbol. "We've cross-referenced it with geographical surveys and historical maps. There's nothing officially recorded at that spot, but it's in an area of the forest that's particularly remote and has never been fully developed or explored." Isa studied the map, committing it to memory. "You haven't sent a team to check it out?" Dennis's expression darkened. "We sent a preliminary survey drone yesterday. The footage showed a clearing that doesn't appear on any official Forest Service maps. There seems to be some kind of structure there, but it's heavily overgrown. We're assembling a ground team." "But, double quotes, but what?" Isa pressed when Dennis trailed off. He hesitated, then pulled out his phone and pulled up a video file. "This is the drone footage. Watch the time code in the corner." Isa took the phone and pressed play. The footage showed an aerial view of dense forest, then a circular clearing with what appeared to be the remains of stone foundations. As the drone hovered over the clearing, the image suddenly distorted, digital artifacts breaking up the picture. The time code, which had been running normally, suddenly jumped forward by exactly 41 minutes before the video cut out entirely. "Equipment malfunction?" Isa asked, though she already suspected there was more to it. Dennis took back the phone, his expression grim. The drone was recovered 2 miles from where it should have been, with no record of how it got there. The technician operating it reported a headache and nosebleed immediately after losing contact. He paused, clearly uncomfortable with what he was about to say next. "Isabella, I've been in law enforcement for over 40 years. I deal in facts, in evidence. But what we're seeing here, I can't explain it. And there's one more thing you should know before we go any further." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded paper. "This was in your brother's school records. I don't know if you've ever seen it." Isa unfolded the paper to find a drawing clearly done by a child, in colored pencil on construction paper. It showed a yellow school bus, surrounded by trees, with stick figures inside. Above the bus, drawn in a childish hand, was the same symbol that appeared on the map and throughout the etchings in the bus, the circle with 5 radiating lines. At the bottom of the page, in the careful printing of a young boy, were the words, "The Sun People are coming for us." The date on the back of the drawing was September 17th, 1981, the day before the disappearance. Isa felt the blood drain from her face as she stared at her brother's drawing. "He knew," she whispered. Somehow, he knew what was going to happen. Dennis nodded slowly. Many of the children reported strange dreams or thoughts in the days leading up to the disappearance. We dismissed it at the time as childhood imagination or coincidence. Now, I'm not so sure." He took a deep breath before continuing. "The team wants to explore the site indicated on the map. But given what we've seen so far, I'm concerned about what they might find, or what might find them. That's why I called you. This case has defined your life, Isabella. You have more knowledge about it than anyone. I need your perspective before we proceed." Isa stood in the decaying shell of the bus, where her brother had last been seen alive, surrounded by the mysterious etchings that hinted at an experience beyond ordinary understanding. The logical part of her mind, the journalist trained to seek verifiable facts, struggled to process what she was seeing. But deeper instincts, perhaps the same ones that had kept her connected to this case for 4 decades, recognized a terrible truth. Whatever happened to these children went beyond conventional crime or tragedy. "I want to go to the site," she said finally, her voice steadier than she felt. "I need to see it for myself." Dennis looked like he'd expected this response, but wasn't happy about it. "The official team isn't scheduled to go until tomorrow, after more aerial surveillance and planning." Issa met his gaze directly. "I'm not waiting for official channels, Dennis. I've waited 41 years already. I'll go alone if I have to." The old sheriff sighed, recognition dawning in his eyes. "You're just like your father, stubborn as hell when your mind's made up." He checked his watch. "It's already past 4. We'd be losing daylight soon, and that's not a place I'd want to be after dark, even under normal circumstances." He seemed to wrestle with himself before coming to a decision. "First light tomorrow. Just you and me, before the official team. We'll take a look, nothing more." Deal. The motel on the outskirts of Millbrook hadn't changed much since Issa had last stayed there. Same faded bedspreads, same humming ice machine outside her door. She sat cross-legged on the bed, Howard Faulkner's logbook open before her. Dennis had pulled strings to let her examine it, though she'd promised not to take it from the evidence bag. The first entries were mundane, routine maintenance checks. Mileage records, notes about rowdy students. Then came September 18, 1981, which started normally, 7:45 a.m., pre-trip inspection complete. Visibility poor due to fog. Departure on schedule for Westbrook Science Center. What followed sent chills down Issa's spine. 8:35 a.m. route diverted. New coordinates received. Children singing. The next entry was dated 3 days later. September 21st. The children are adapting well. The youngest ones understand fastest. Jacob M. has made contact first. Issa's hands trembled as she read her brother's name. The entries continued, becoming increasingly bizarre. October 3rd. The light teaches us new songs. Time moves differently here. November 18th. The children can now write in the new language. Their dreams are stronger. The final entry, dated exactly 1 year after the disappearance, was the most disturbing. September 18th, 1982. They are ready to proceed to the next phase. Jacob leads them now. The door opens tonight. We will leave the vessel behind. Issa barely slept that night, her dreams filled with images of her brother walking into a brilliant light, looking back over his shoulder to say something she couldn't quite hear. She met Dennis at the sheriff's office at 5:30 a.m., before sunrise. He'd brought hiking gear, water, and emergency supplies, along with a satellite phone and GPS device. "I've marked the coordinates from the map," he explained as they loaded his SUV. "It's about a 2-hour hike from the nearest access road." They drove in silence as dawn broke over the hills, painting the lingering wisps of morning fog with golden light. Issa couldn't help noticing how similar the conditions were to the day of the disappearance. The same early autumn chill, the same mist clinging to the valleys. Dennis must have been thinking the same thing. History has a way of echoing itself, he said quietly as they parked at the trailhead. The forest was peaceful, almost eerily so. No birdsong, no rustling of animals in the underbrush. Just the sound of their own breathing and footsteps on the leaf-covered ground. They hiked steadily uphill, following the GPS coordinates, speaking little. The farther they went, the more Issa felt a strange sensation. Not quite déjà vu, but a sense of recognition, as if she'd walked this path in dreams. At the 2-hour mark, Dennis checked the GPS and frowned. "We should be nearly there, but ... He tapped the device, which showed their position still a quarter mile from the target. "Let's keep going." As they crested a small ridge, Issa suddenly stopped, grabbing Dennis's arm. Ahead of them was a perfect circular clearing in the dense forest, too perfect to be natural. At its center stood a structure that made no architectural sense, stone walls that seemed to curve inward at impossible angles, forming a rough dome shape, heavily overgrown with vines and moss. "That's it," she whispered, though she couldn't have explained how she knew. Dennis checked the GPS again, frowning deeper. "According to this, we're still not there. But that has to be it." As they approached the clearing, Isa noticed strange patterns in the placement of stones and trees around its perimeter. The same five-pointed star symbol that had appeared on the bus and in Jacob's drawing, but on a massive scale, only visible when looking at the entire clearing from above. Or, she realized with a chill, from below. Dennis pulled out a small device and checked the readings. No radiation, normal electromagnetic readings. He looked up at the stone structure. "I don't like this, Isabella. We should wait for the team." But Isa was already moving forward, drawn toward the structure by a pull she couldn't explain. As she approached, she noticed markings on the stone walls, etchings similar to those inside the bus, but older, weathered by decades of exposure. She reached out to touch one that looked familiar, a series of interconnected circles and lines. The moment her fingertips connected with the etched stone, a jolt ran through her body, not painful, but intensely alive, like static electricity multiplied 1,000-fold. Images flashed through her mind, children walking in single file into the structure, their faces serene. Her brother, slightly older than when he'd disappeared, holding out his hand to someone just out of view. Howard Faulkner, writing frantically in his logbook while strange lights danced around him. She pulled her hand back with a gasp, stumbling slightly. Dennis was at her side instantly. "What happened?" he demanded, steadying her. Isa shook her head, trying to clear the lingering images. "I saw... I don't know what I saw. Memories, visions." She looked up at the structure with new understanding. "They came here willingly, Dennis. Whatever happened, they weren't afraid." Before Dennis could respond, a low humming sound began to emanate from the structure, not mechanical, but almost musical, like the sustained note of a crystal glass when its rim is rubbed. The air around them seemed to thicken, and Isa noticed a strange quality to the light filtering through the trees. It had taken on a golden hue that didn't match the morning sun. "We need to leave," Dennis said urgently, pulling at her arm. But Isa found herself unable to move, transfixed by a narrow opening in the stone structure that she hadn't noticed before. The humming grew louder, and the golden light intensified, seeming to pour from the opening like liquid sunshine. And then she heard it faint at first, then growing clearer, the sound of children's voices singing a melody she didn't recognize, but somehow knew. Among them, slightly stronger than the others, was a voice she would know anywhere, the voice she had heard only in dreams for 41 years. "Jacob," she whispered, taking a step toward the opening. The singing paused, and then a single voice responded, a boy's voice, unchanged by time. "Isa, is that you? You finally found us." Dennis grabbed her shoulders, shaking her slightly. "Isabella, there's nothing there. No one is speaking." But Isa could see what he couldn't. The opening was widening, the golden light spilling out more intensely, and within it, shadowy figures were taking shape. Children, dozens of them, holding hands in a circle around a central point of brilliance, too intense to look at directly. And at the edge of the circle, facing her, was Jacob, still 11 years old, exactly as she remembered him, but with an ageless quality to his eyes that spoke of experiences beyond human understanding. "We've been waiting for you," he said, his voice somehow both a child's and not. "But you can't come in yet. It's not your time." Tears streamed down Isa's face as she reached toward him, stopped only by Dennis's restraining grip. "What happened to you?" she cried. "Where have you Been all these years. Jacob smiled, a familiar expression that broke her heart with its innocence. Time is different here, Isa. For us, it's only been a few days. We're learning so much. The Sun People are teaching us things we couldn't learn in our world. The Sun People, Isa repeated, remembering the symbol from Jacob's drawing. Her brother nodded, gesturing toward the brilliant center of the circle where the light was most intense. They found us because we could see them already in dreams, in drawings. Not all humans can. They needed us to help them understand your world. His expression grew serious, suddenly seeming older than his years. They're not bad, Isa. They're just ... different. They experience reality in ways we can't comprehend. They're teaching us how to bridge the gap between our worlds. Dennis was pulling more insistently now, his voice urgent in her ear. Isabella, we need to go now. My watch has stopped, and the GPS is malfunctioning. Whatever this is, it's affecting our equipment. But Isa couldn't leave, not when she was finally facing the brother she'd lost so long ago. Can you come back? She asked Jacob desperately. Can any of you come home? Jacob's smile turned sad. Home is relative now, Isa. We exist in multiple states simultaneously, but we can send messages back. We've been trying to for years. Through dreams, through the bus we left behind. The markings were our way of explaining, but language is limited. The other families, Isa said, thinking of the parents who had died never knowing what happened to their children. They deserve to know you're safe, that you are alive. She hesitated on the last word, unsure if it accurately described her brother's current state of existence. Jacob seemed to understand her uncertainty. Life and death are constructs that don't fully apply where we are, he explained gently. But yes, in the way that matters to you, we are alive and well, happy even. We've evolved beyond what we were. The golden light began to pulse, and the humming sound changed pitch. Jacob looked over his shoulder at the brilliant center, then back at Isa. Our time is running short. The alignment that allows this communication is passing. He reached out toward her, his hand stopping just short of where reality seemed to bend between them. You can tell them we're safe, Isa. You can give them peace. But there's something else you need to know, something important. The light was already fading, the figures of the children becoming less distinct. Jacob's voice grew fainter as he said, this wasn't the first time they've reached out, and it won't be the last. There are others like us children who can see beyond normal reality. They'll be called too. Before Isa could ask what he meant, the golden light contracted suddenly, pulling back into the stone structure with a sound like a rush of wind. The opening narrowed and vanished, leaving only an ordinary stone wall covered in mysterious etchings. The humming stopped, and the forest sounds returned, birds calling, leaves rustling in the breeze. Dennis released his grip on her shoulders, looking pale and shaken. Did you ... Isa began, but stopped when she saw his expression. I didn't see or hear what you did, he admitted. But I felt something, a presence, a consciousness that wasn't human. And for a moment, just before it ended, I thought I heard singing. He checked his watch, which had started running again, and blanched. Isabella, we've been here for over 3 hours. It felt like minutes. Isa looked back at the stone structure, now seeming smaller and less significant in the ordinary daylight. She approached it again, touching the wall where the opening had been, but felt nothing but cool, rough stone. No jolt of energy, no visions. Whatever window had opened between worlds had closed completely. Yet she knew, with absolute certainty, that what she'd experienced had been real as the bus buried in the mud, as real as the 41 years she'd spent searching for answers. The hike back to the car was surreal, each step taking Isa further from her brother, yet somehow bringing her closer to understanding. What will you tell the official investigation team? She asked Dennis as they reached the trailhead. The old sheriff was quiet for a long moment before answering. The truth, as far as it can be expressed in official reports. We found an unusual stone structure that appears to be very old, possibly predating European settlement. We experienced time discrepancies and equipment malfunctions that warrant further scientific study. The connection to the bus and the missing children remains unclear. He looked at her with tired eyes. But the families deserve more than an official report, Isabella. They deserve the truth you experienced, even if it defies conventional explanation. Isa nodded, already composing in her mind how she would tell the parents and siblings who remained, how she would describe an experience that transcended ordinary reality without sounding delusional. They might not believe me, she said softly. I'm not sure I would, if I hadn't seen it myself. Dennis started the engine, casting one last look at the forest behind them. Faith comes in many forms, he said. Sometimes, just knowing someone else believes is enough. In the weeks that followed, the discovery of Bus 714 became national news. The official investigation confirmed what Dennis had predicted, a conclusion that raised more questions than it answered. The bus had been deliberately driven into a remote area and concealed by a manufactured landslide. The children and driver had survived for some time afterward, as evidenced by the elaborate etchings inside and outside the vehicle. Their ultimate fate remained classified as undetermined, though foul play was not suspected. The stone structure in the clearing was documented and studied, but revealed little under scientific scrutiny, just an unusual formation of unknown origin and purpose, possibly used for astronomical observations by indigenous peoples centuries earlier. The connection between the structure and the missing children remained officially speculative due to insufficient evidence. For most of the world, the Millbrook bus disappearance remained an unsolved mystery, a bizarre footnote in the annals of unexplained events. But for the families, there was something more, something Isa brought them that official reports couldn't provide. She visited each remaining family personally, sitting in living rooms filled with faded photographs and preserved bedrooms, sharing the truth as she had experienced it. Some wept, some questioned, some embraced her with the desperate gratitude of people finally receiving the closure they'd sought for decades. She showed them the pages of Howard Faulkner's logbook, the strange etchings from the bus, and Jacob's drawing of the Sun People. She described the golden light in the forest clearing and the children singing within it. Most importantly, she conveyed Jacob's message. They were safe, they were happy, they had evolved into something beyond ordinary human experience. Not all believed her story exactly as she told it. Some reinterpreted it through the lens of their religious faith, others through scientific theories about dimensional shifting or undiscovered physics. But all found some measure of peace in knowing their children had not suffered, had not been victims of violence or cruelty, but had instead been chosen for something extraordinary. For the first time in 41 years, the weight of uncertainty lifted from the town of Millbrook. People began to speak of the missing children, not with hushed voices and pained expressions, but with a sense of wonder and even pride. Isa finished her book, titling it "The Light Teaches Us New Songs," a phrase from Howard Faulkner's logbook that had resonated with her. It became a bestseller, bringing renewed attention to the case, but also sparking intense debate among readers. Some dismissed it as elaborate fiction, or the delusions of a woman who'd spent her life obsessed with her brother's disappearance. Others embraced it as evidence of phenomena beyond current scientific understanding. Academics in fields ranging from physics to religious studies cited it in papers exploring the boundaries of human perception and experience. Isa herself became something of a reluctant public figure, declining most interview requests, but occasionally speaking at conferences about the nature of reality and human consciousness. She maintained a careful balance in these appearances, presenting the facts as she knew them without insisting on any particular interpretation. "I'm not here to convince you of what happened," she would say. "I'm here to share what I experienced and what the evidence shows. The meaning you find in it is your own." Privately, however, she had no doubts about what she had seen and heard in that forest clearing. Her brother, unchanged by time, existing in a state beyond ordinary human comprehension. A year after publishing her book, Isa received a letter from a woman in Arizona whose 10-year-old daughter had been having strange dreams about children singing in golden light. The woman had read Isa's book and recognized elements of her daughter's dreams: the 5-pointed sun symbol, the circle of children, the sense of being called to something greater than ordinary reality. The letter included a drawing the child had made showing figures standing in a circle around a brilliant center, remarkably similar to Jacob's drawing from 41 years earlier. It was the first of many such letters Isa would receive in the coming months. Parents from across the country, and eventually around the world, describing children who dreamed of singing circles and golden light, who drew the same symbols without ever having seen them before, who spoke of sun people waiting to teach them. Isa remembered Jacob's final message: "This wasn't the first time they've reached out, and it won't be the last. There are others like us, children who can see beyond normal reality. They'll be called too." With each letter, each drawing that arrived in her mailbox, she understood more clearly what her brother had been trying to tell her: that the story of the Millbrook bus was not ending, but beginning again in a new generation. On a cool autumn morning much like the one when bus 714 had disappeared, Isa stood at the edge of the forest clearing, watching as researchers from a prestigious university set up equipment to monitor the stone structure. After intense public interest in her book, the site had been designated for scientific study, a joint project between physicists, anthropologists, and parapsychologists attempting to document and understand the phenomena associated with it. Isa had agreed to serve as a consultant, though she maintained a healthy skepticism about whether conventional science could fully capture what she had experienced there. As the research team bustled around her, setting up sensors and cameras, she felt a familiar presence, not the overwhelming consciousness of the Sun People, but something more intimate and personal. "I know you're still here," she whispered, too quietly for the researchers to hear. "I know you're watching." There was no dramatic response, no golden light, no ethereal singing, but a subtle shift in the air around her, a momentary sense of connection across whatever barrier separated her reality from her brother's. And in that moment, Isa understood that the true mystery was not what had happened to the 52 children who had vanished on a foggy September morning 42 years ago. The true mystery was what they were becoming, and what it might mean for humanity's understanding of its place in a universe far stranger and more wonderful than anyone had imagined. As she watched the researchers with their instruments and theories, Isa smiled to herself, knowing they were looking for evidence of something that could not be measured or quantified by conventional means, something that could only be experienced through the unique perception of those called to see beyond ordinary reality. The children of bus 714 had been only the beginning. Pioneers crossing a threshold between worlds that most humans never perceived. Now, a new generation of children was dreaming of golden light and singing circles, drawing 5-pointed sun symbols, and speaking of beings who existed beyond ordinary human comprehension. Whatever had begun in Millbrook 42 years ago was still unfolding, rippling outward through time and consciousness like concentric circles in still water. And Isa, who had spent her life searching for her lost brother, now found herself in a new role, a bridge between worlds, a translator of experiences that defied conventional explanation, a guardian of a truth too vast and strange for most to comprehend. Dennis retired from law enforcement the following spring, but remained involved in the ongoing investigation as a civilian consultant. "Funny how things work out," he told Isa over coffee in the same diner where they'd met countless times over. the decades to discuss the case. I spent my entire career looking for those kids, convinced I'd failed them and their families. Now it turns out they were never lost at all, just somewhere our maps don't cover. He'd aged visibly in the years since they'd stood together in the forest clearing. The strain of bridging official explanations with inexplicable experiences taking its toll. Yet there was a peace in his eyes that hadn't been there before. The satisfaction of a life's work completed, however unconventional. The federal agencies are still treating it as an open investigation, he continued, but they're focusing on the wrong questions. They want to know who drove the bus there, who triggered the landslide, who created the etchings. They're looking for human perpetrators because that's what they're trained to find. He shook his head slowly. How do you explain to the FBI that the culprit might be a non-human intelligence from beyond our understanding of reality? They'd laugh you out of the room. Issa understood his frustration. She'd faced similar skepticism from officials who acknowledged the physical evidence, but rejected any explanation that challenged conventional understanding. It doesn't matter what they believe, she told him gently. What matters is that the families know their children weren't victims, they were chosen for something extraordinary. Dennis nodded, stirring his coffee thoughtfully. Still, I wonder about Howard Faulkner. Was he part of it from the beginning? Was he contacted before that day, prepared somehow? His logbook entries suggest he understood what was happening, at least partially. Issa had wondered the same thing. The bus driver's role in the event remained one of the most intriguing aspects of the case. Had he been a willing participant, a fellow traveler chosen to shepherd the children to their destination? Or had he, like the children, been selected? In the moment for qualities only the son people could perceive. I think, she said slowly, that Howard was as surprised as anyone when it began. But he adapted quickly, accepted what was happening, and eventually embraced his role as guardian and recorder. His last entry about leaving the vessel behind suggests he fully intended to go with the children to whatever existed beyond that threshold. The university research team maintained their monitoring of the stone structure for 3 years, documenting occasional anomalies, unexplained electromagnetic fluctuations, localized gravitational variations, equipment malfunctions that occurred at precise intervals corresponding to astronomical alignments. They published papers in respected journals, careful to present their findings as unexplained phenomena worthy of further study, rather than evidence of non-human intelligence or interdimensional contact. But privately, many of the researchers came to believe something profound and paradigm-shifting was occurring at the site. One physicist, after witnessing a particularly intense event, where golden light briefly emanated from the structure during a specific planetary alignment, resigned from the university to start a foundation dedicated to studying what she called consciousness technologies, methods of perception and communication that transcended conventional physical limitations. The stone structure itself became a pilgrimage site for those who had read Issa's book and felt drawn to its mystery. Parents of the missing children, now elderly but still vital in their quest for understanding, psychics and sensitives who claimed to hear the singing even when instruments recorded nothing, and increasingly, children and young people who reported dreams and visions similar to those Jacob had experienced before his disappearance. Issa continued to receive letters from around the world, hundreds, then thousands of them, describing similar experiences, similar symbols, similar calls from beyond ordinary reality. She began to catalog them, noting patterns and connections. Clusters of reports following certain astronomical events, correlations with solar activity, geographical distributions that formed recognizable patterns when mapped globally. With the help of volunteers, she created a database and eventually a network connecting these individuals and families, providing a community where experiences that would be dismissed as delusion or fantasy in mainstream society could be shared and validated. This network grew into something she hadn't anticipated. Not just a support group, but a kind of distributed research project, with participants documenting their experiences and findings with increasing sophistication. Children who had been drawing sun symbols and having dreams of golden light in their early years grew into teenagers and young adults with unusual perceptual abilities, synesthesia that allowed them to see radio waves, heightened intuition that bordered on precognition, an uncanny ability to understand and manipulate complex mathematical and physical concepts without formal training. These young people began to develop their own theories about what was happening, theories that blended cutting-edge physics with perspectives that seemed to come from beyond conventional human understanding. 5 years after the discovery of Bus 17, ESA published a second book, The Next Phase, documenting this growing phenomenon and its implications for humanity's understanding of consciousness and reality. By then, the original Millbrook case had become part of a larger narrative, a pivotal event that had opened a door between worlds but was no longer unique or isolated. Similar incidents had been documented in other locations, not always involving children, not always with the same specific patterns, but sharing certain fundamental qualities that suggested a consistent intelligence or consciousness reaching across some threshold of perception to make contact with receptive humans. The scientific community remained divided on how to interpret these events. Some dismissed them as mass delusion or social contagion. Others proposed theories involving quantum consciousness or multidimensional reality that might explain the observed phenomena within established scientific frameworks. A small but growing number of researchers, however, were willing to consider more radical possibilities, that what humans experienced as reality was merely one layer or frequency of a far more complex cosmos, and that other forms of intelligence might exist in aspects of that cosmos that most humans couldn't perceive directly. For Isa, now in her 50s, the search for her brother had evolved into something far greater than she could have imagined when she'd begun investigating his disappearance decades earlier. She no longer thought of Jacob as lost or missing, but as transformed, a pioneer in humanity's next evolutionary step. The dreams and visions reported by children around the world suggested that whatever had begun with the Millbrook bus was accelerating, reaching more and more receptive minds, preparing them for something profound. They're building a bridge. One young woman told Isa during a conference on consciousness studies, "Your brother and the others, they're creating a way for our species to perceive and interact with realities we've always been blind to." They needed children because children's minds aren't yet fully locked into conventional perception. They could see the sun people when adults couldn't. This theory resonated with Isa's own understanding of what had happened. The children hadn't been taken, they'd been invited to participate in something beyond ordinary human experience, and they had accepted that invitation willingly, recognizing on some deep level the opportunity it represented. On the 20th anniversary of the bus's discovery, 61 years after the original disappearance, Isa returned to the stone structure in Blackridge Forest. The university research project had ended years earlier, though automated monitoring equipment still recorded data that was periodically collected and analyzed. The site itself had been protected by a conservation easement, preventing development or exploitation while allowing limited access for research and personal visits. Isa came alone, hiking the familiar trail as dawn broke over the hills, feeling the weight of decades of searching, finding, and understanding. She was no longer young, her dark hair now streaked with silver, her face lined with the experiences of a life dedicated to unraveling one of the greatest mysteries of her time. Yet, as she approached the clearing, she felt a sense of completion rather than age, the closing of a circle that had begun when she was 6 years old, watching her brother disappear into the fog. The stone structure stood as it always had, seemingly unchanged by time or weather, its enigmatic etchings still visible on the rough surfaces. Isa sat on a flat rock facing the structure, breathing in the cool morning air, and waited. She didn't expect a dramatic manifestation. The golden light and singing had appeared to her only once in all the years she'd visited this place. But she felt a familiar presence, a subtle shift in the quality of awareness around her that she had come to recognize as contact from beyond the threshold of ordinary perception. "I kept my promise, Jacob," she said aloud, though there was no one physically present to hear her. "I told them you were safe. I helped them understand." The wind rustled through the trees, bringing with it a sense of acknowledgement and gratitude that transcended words. Isa smiled, feeling tears well in her eyes, not from sorrow, but from the profound recognition of being part of something vast and wonderful that extended beyond her individual life. She had spent decades trying to solve the mystery of what had happened to her brother and the other children on bus 714. Now she understood that she had been part of the mystery all along, the sister left behind, the witness, the messenger, who would bridge worlds and prepare humanity for a new understanding of its place in the cosmos. As she sat in the peaceful clearing, watching the morning light filter through the trees, Isa felt a profound sense of purpose and belonging. The story that had begun with a yellow school bus disappearing into the fog 61 years ago was still unfolding and would continue long after her own journey ended, a bridge between worlds that would eventually transform humanity's understanding of reality itself.